Welcome to another edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my guest today is Joann Lublin. Those of you who know the show know that Grace Under Pressure deals with the soft stuff that we too often dismiss, the caring, the commitment, respect we show toward others. And when you do it as a leader, it requires pulling people together for common cause. My guest today is Joann Lublin, and I want to tell you all about her. Welcome, Joann.
Thanks for having me, John.
Now, Joann doesn't know this, but we go back a long way because she has been writing a column for the Wall Street Journal for decades, and I have read that column. So this is a special treat for me, folks, to have Joann join us. Let me tell you about it. She was management news editor for the Wall Street Journal, working with reporters in the United States and abroad. She retired in 2018, but she remains a journal contributor. She speaks about leadership issues and executive women. She created the journal's advice column in 1993, which I have been reading, and kept writing your executive career column until just last year. And she won a Pulitzer Prize in 2003 for a story. So way cool. I think you are the first Pulitzer Prize winning I've ever had on this show. So I am deeply honored. Joann, you are the author of the popular book, Earning It, Hard-Won Lessons from Trailblazing Women at the Top of the Business World. She won the 2018 Lifetime Achievement from the Loeb Awards, highest accolade in business journalism. And her brand new book, which we are going to focus on now, is called Power Moms, How Executive Mothers Navigate Work and Life. Welcome, Joann.
Thanks again for having me, John.
Joann, I work with many, many successful women. And too often, though, I've seen them cringe when speaking about being, quote, bad mothers. The reality is that these women are excellent parents, as well as true leaders. Why do women, successful women, get down on themselves about mothering?
Well, I think that's a really great question. And I believe that women get down on themselves over, quote, successful mothering because of something known as unconscious bias. And it's the idea that we all have sort of fixed notions of what a successful mother is. And as a successful mother, someone who is working real hard to be successful in her career. For many, many years in our society, these were diametrically opposite roles. And while a lot has changed, and it's what I observed in reporting this book, we still have these gender stereotypes, and they affect men as well as women. We have this notion that a good dad is not one who's highly involved with their children, who's not one who takes his fully paid parental leave. It's someone who is always on for work. And we have that expectation as well for women. And so men, for the most part, do not take their full allotted paid parental leave. And women, no matter how hard they work at being mothers, guilt trip themselves unnecessarily. I can't tell you how many men like you I've been interviewed about the book just in the last 6 weeks since it's come out, who have said, yeah, I'm a working dad. And I often, left work early to go to Johnny's baseball game. And if I got there too late to see him hit the home run, I felt badly, but I didn't give myself a big guilt trip on it. But gosh, if my wife, the same thing happened, oh my goodness, I didn't hear the end of it for hours afterwards. So why is it that the women have more guilt over being quote unquote successful mothers than the men do over being successful fathers? And it comes down to those roles.
Yeah, it's the unconscious bias we have. So, there is the guilt that dads don't have and mothers do.
Less.
Yes, okay. So how can working mothers get past the guilt?
Well, again, that is an issue that women in both generations have struggled with. And just to give the larger context here, for this book, I interviewed 111 women. 86 were executive mothers. And they came from two generations. They were the boomer moms, my generation, and then Gen Xers and Millennials. 2/3 of those younger women were Gen Xers. So at the time of the interviews, they ranged in age from early 30s to early 40s. Separate from that, I interviewed 25 adult daughters of the boomer moms.
Oh.
And so it was kind of then like a 2.5 generational sweep in terms of seeing how far we've gone and how much things have improved and gotten easier, which they have for executive mothers, but how much is left undone. And that left undone category is also in that category of guilt. And so I devote a whole chapter to 10 hacks, the best hacks I could collect from those two generations.
Great. I want to delve into those, but this is interesting perspective. What did the adult mothers of working mothers,
you mean the adult daughters?
Adult daughters, excuse me. What did they say about their mom's mothering? So
you mean about their mom, not about their mom's mother.
Their moms, yes, their mothers.
Okay. All right. So the 25 adult daughters, many of them had rocky relationships during adolescence, particularly as they got close to the end of high school, where they were sort of starting to assert themselves and assert their independence.
Yeah.
And when they became, frankly, more aware of the fact that their mom had a pretty stressful life, not only trying to be a highly successful executive, but also trying to meet those social expectations for what a successful mother was like. And at the same time, because their mothers were so successful, the mothers often were pushing and pressuring these daughters to kind of be like them. Go to my alma mater, major in math like I did, go into tech or go into marketing, follow my footsteps, because they have actually given me a very rewarding and enjoyable career. And the daughters often pushed back and did not want to follow in mom's footsteps for one of those two reasons. They did not want to have a life as stressful as she had had. Mm-hmm. And so they chose areas or industries or professions where either they could work from home or where they wouldn't have to be in such a demanding, high status, high level position. So they did not want to be a CEO if mom was a CEO.
Oh, that's
and by the same token, some of them did not choose to major or go to the same college. But on the other hand, there were a minority who did exactly that and were very happy. But then, P.S., once they got out of college and were entering the workforce, almost overwhelmingly, these adult daughters suddenly saw mom as their secret weapon. She was their career coach who could help them open doors, who could make networking connections, who could coach them about that job interview, the follow-up, nice little handwritten letter, who could guide them when they had to make incredibly difficult decisions as first-time supervisors. And then when it came time to move on to another employer, repeat the whole process all over again.
That's good. It went from moms pushing against, as daughters, as children do, and then becoming, quote, career coach. That's a good twist on that and perspective, and that proves that mothers are human, is it not?
Well, we all knew that, and in fact, we'd give ourselves a lot less guilt trips as working moms if we would accept the fact that we are imperfect, and as you would say, learn to live with grace under pressure.
Right. And but there is, and I as a man, I'm a grandfather now, so I can say whatever the heck I want. I pay my dues. But no, I mean, the pressure that you experience this, because you are of the boomer generation. You were a working mom and a very successful career. Journalism is not one where you can skate and you've been recognized and all of those things. So you know these pressures inside and out. So it gives you a different perspective. So
I agree.
Great. So you came up with a phrase called work-life sway. What is that all about? Sway versus balance.
Well, I do not take credit for having invented the phrase. I do take credit for certainly publicizing it in my book. In fact, when I submitted the manuscript a year ago, March, that was going to be the subtitle. The book was going to be called Power Moms: Secrets of Work-Life Sway from Two Generations of Executive Women. And the publisher accepted the title, but said, you can't use a subtitle, no one will have the foggiest idea what you're talking about. And it's true, it is a relatively new concept, but it's the idea that when we have to be there for work, we throw 110% of ourselves into the job needs. But if life intrudes, particularly when we've been working from home, as so many of us have been for the last year, we sway and are 110% focused for what our life, personal / family needs are. Right. I was introduced to this concept when I interviewed one of those younger executive moms, and she was the very first younger executive mom I interviewed. And she told me about this, and I still didn't have any idea what she was talking about. I knew that work-life balance was an impossible myth to achieve, and ideal that would never be achieved. Right. But she gave me a great example. She is an executive at Phillips, which is a big auction house, and was at work late one afternoon when a video popped up on her phone, a little text message from the nanny, and her toddler son had just taken his first steps. And so she could see it live. And so she swayed out of work mode and got into focusing on her son mode, and immediately left work early so she could be there for steps number 6, 7, and 8.
Oh, what a great.
And the whole idea here is that if you are practicing work-life sway, you're not going to be hitting yourself up over the head over guilt.
Right. I'll just postulate this. I think that women are better at sway than men. I think men keep work. Well, I'll speak from personal example. Keep things in the back of their mind, and while they're focused on one thing, they may be thinking about another. So, of course, maybe that's just me. But anyway, so how do you? Because the fascinating interest in your book that is so captivating is the interviewed 2 or actually 2.5 generations of women. How do boomer women differ from Gen X / millennials? So.
Well, that is what I set out to find out. Had things really changed? And if they did, which indeed that is what I concluded, what accounts for some of those improvements and greater acceptance of women's roles as working moms that the Gen Xers and millennials, frankly, are benefiting from? And I really saw 3 reasons behind that change. And one of them is the improvements in technology. We wouldn't have been able to be communicating the way we are now and working remotely as we have been over the past year if it hadn't been for those advances in technology. When you could only dial up slowly, you tended not to work from home after hours, which of course can be a blessing and a curse. Right. The second change is that the executive mothers of these younger cadre have much more involved spouses, whether it's a husband, a life partner, in one case, a wife. They frankly insist on that as table stakes. You know, if you want to engage in a long-term relationship with me and you want to have children, we need to be taking a co-parenting attitude towards how we raise our kids. And we need to talk about these issues before we have kids, after we have kids, and while the kids are growing up, because our needs, their needs, our careers are all going to be in a constant state of flux.
That's a
and
great
And the third change is that the workplace has changed. Companies and employers of all kinds, nonprofits and government agencies, recognize that having a satisfied workforce is a productive workforce, and that obviously applies to working parents. And so they've increased the benefits, they've increased their willingness to promote parents, in particular mothers. And as a result, many of those boomer moms are now in senior level roles where they can serve as mentors, sponsors, advocates, role models for those younger women, some of whom have not yet become executives.
No, that's great. The workplace has changed. I'm glad that you're affirming that. So now that your book was recently published, but what I like to say this, working parents who are working from home and their children helping educate their children who are working, being educated remotely, are under tremendous stress, and hero stories. What are you hearing from mothers about this? I'm assuming they're taking greater responsibility either by default or whatever. And what are you observing, Joann?
Well, as has been documented by several studies, women with children, women in general have been leaving the workforce in greater numbers than men early on in the pandemic. But women with young children, it's even a greater toll. And so they're either losing their jobs or they're dropping out because of the need for educating their children from home and the childcare demands. There also have been studies that have suggested that men are stepping up to the plate in terms of taking a greater role in domestic chores, the laundry, the cleaning, the cooking, but less so when it comes to childcare duties. And as a result, there was another study that was only recently released in which it showed that fathers of young children have regained most of the ground that was lost in terms of leaving or losing their jobs, but there's been very little improvement in terms of the employment of mothers with young kids.
It's interesting you mentioned that about the child care, because so often children or mothers talk about the care, and when it's dad's turn, it's babysitting as if it's a job, but so it's not really babysitting. It's
no, but you know what? That's part of the unconscious bias. Mm-hmm. And what I think is beyond the role models and the trails they blaze, I think one of the other great legacies that the baby boomers have achieved is they have been raising feminist sons. I have raised a feminist son as well as a feminist daughter. And when he became a father for the first time, and buddies of him would say, "Oh, I can't go do this with you, I'm babysitting my son," my son would correct them. And he would say, "You mean you're parenting your son or parenting your daughter?" So. And he never, ever saw it in those, kinds of terms. And when his first child was born, who's going to turn 10 very soon, parental leave, paternity leave was not an option. When his now 7.5-year-old was born, he was the first guy in his office to take paternity leave because that's what they called it. Yeah. When his now almost 3-year-old was born, it was ho-hum. "Oh, great, you're taking parental leave. We'll see you in a couple months, Dan." So it totally changed in the course of 7 years.
That's great. So, and you do write about, what does it mean to have a feminist son? I like this term.
Well, I think in addition to raising a son who knows the importance of being a highly involved father, which he is, it also means you're raising sons who recognize unfairness and inequities in how women are treated in the workplace. There's this great story in the book where this 30-something younger power mom gets promoted to VP and goes to a very important work luncheon, which has got all men in the room. They're either mid-level managers or VP and above. She's the only woman. And they are about to break for lunch, but nobody has brought lunch into the room. And so an older senior vice president turns to this 30-something female VP and says, "Hey, how about going to check and see where the lunch is?"
Right.
And she's like, "Well, I don't know where the lunch is. Why would she have the foggiest idea where the lunch is? But she should know, right? She's the woman in the room." And at that point, one of her peers, a man who is her age in his 30s and a VP, pipes up and says to this older guy, "It's not her responsibility to go find out where lunch is just because she's the only woman in the room. If you really care so much about where lunch is, why don't you go check it out?" And the guy sniffs haughtily and, marches out of the room. And I said to her, "Why did he stick up for you? Because he was, your age?" And she said, "No, because his mom is an executive."
Good for him. Well, it's a good story. Okay, we had touched on this before, and I know you write on this, that what does it, women often opt for a, quote, enhanced or reduced schedule. What's the downside besides loss of income? So.
Well, the downside to the reduced schedule is the extent to which you are seen as, number one, less committed to your career because you're working fewer hours. And number two, being overlooked for not only promotions, but for participation in, say, cross-functional task forces where you might be exposed to key players in other parts of your organization. And they don't actually look to you to invite you to be on these task forces because they figure you don't have the time or you wouldn't have the interest because you're working a reduced schedule.
Right. And now, here's my thing. We are sooner than later, like fingers crossed, we'll be going back to a workplace face-to-face. I know some of my clients already are on a limited basis. My gut reaction is that more women will opt for working from anywhere than will men. Joann, do you see that will have an impact on women's opportunities for promotion? So.
It definitely could have a negative impact, John. But that's why it's incumbent upon managers and employers to make sure that the employees, whether it's men or women, who choose to continue to work from home full or part-time, don't get lost in the shuffle, that they get taught virtual networking skills. They get taught the importance of reaching out to key colleagues ahead of a meeting that they are only going to attend by Zoom, who can be there in person, who will be there in person, and who can not only speak up in support of their budget or their proposal, but who can also object when their voice is not being heard or where there's mansplaining going on. Right. And so the idea here is women are indeed at risk of falling behind in terms of their advancement prospects, but not if the workplace and the work supervisors are mindful of this and go make extra efforts to keep them included, but also teach them about how to stay visible.
That's great. Now, you had touched on this, and you said you have 10 hacks for creating, being a, quote, more successful power mom.
No, for getting rid of working mother guilt.
Oh, getting rid of, okay. So how do we get rid of the guilt? What are some of the ways that you would advise women to do that, Joann? So.
Well, one of the ways of doing that is practicing self-care. And that's this notion that taking care of ourselves is not a selfish act. It is a selfless act. Even if it just means that you set your alarm 10 minutes early and you meditate or you watch the sunrise because that's all you have time to do, that's fine. But it could be more significant than that. It can be negotiating with your partner, with your significant other, to trade off blocks of time in the middle of the workday where you get to go for the walk or the bike ride. And particularly when you're working from home, you're going to get Zoom fatigue really fast. Another thing is to set aside some vacation time on a regular basis to have a special day with each child. There's this great example in the book where this woman takes 3 vacation days every quarter for a mommy day because she has 3 kids. And each kid gets to choose how he or she wants to spend that mommy day. I did something like that when I moved into management at the Wall Street Journal when we lived in London. Mm-hmm. When our kids had spring break, the first time we were, the first spring break we were there, each kid got a mommy day with me and the other kid played with daddy, right, at home. But the kid got to choose what they did. Right. Well, I should have known, that my son would choose to spend 8 hours in a toy store with a break for lunch.
Of course. Sounds reasonable to me. I still like toys. So they're just bigger. That's all. That's good. So in other words, what you've done is you've distilled lessons that, and that's why your book is practical and has some real
and tactical as well.
That's great. You also put on your critic's hat for a second, or I'll throw you a curve. What are some U.S. businesses doing wrong when it comes to employees with children? What?
Well, I think the main thing that businesses are doing wrong when it comes to employees with children is that businesses assume that they're doing everything right. After all,
that's a bias. That's a bias.
We expanded parental leave to be 16 weeks from 8 weeks, and we let the men take it as well as the women. But frankly, we put in those changes 2 years ago, and we haven't bothered since then to look to see what the usage is of these benefits. And we haven't done any kind of employee surveys to find out what else it is that these parents really need that we're not addressing. One of the companies that I showcase in the book offers a 24/7 parental concierge before people go off on parental leave, during their parental leave, and on an open-ended basis when they return from parental leave. You can ask the concierge anything. Well, maybe that's something your employees would like to have, but frankly, you haven't bothered to ask them. You're just taking off-the-shelf solutions that some, no offense here, consultant recommended. And you're not taking the temperature often enough.
Right. Well, no, it gets back to you're ticking the box rather than exploring the issue and getting it.
Exactly.
So, so given that notice, what advice would you have for a young woman, a millennial, or we're getting to Gen Z, will soon be parents. So what about choosing the right employer for herself, her career, and her family? What do you, when young women ask you, Joann, what do you say?
Well, I say that before you choose that right employer, you have to have chosen your right life partner, but hopefully that has already happened. But in choosing the right employer, again, don't just look at the slick videos at the recruiting website, that are showing all these happy parents playing with children. That means nothing. It means that they're really good at producing slick videos. You need to reach out and talk to people who are working there now with children. You need to talk to people who used to work there. You need to talk to people perhaps that retired and kind of worked there for a long time and saw maybe this workplace evolve. You ought to find out if they have employee resource groups that are focused on parents, and talk to the executive sponsor of the employee resource group for parents and see where they're going in terms of helping the parents. You ought to obviously look at all the various websites that rank, whether workplaces are friendly. Look at things like Working Mother Media to see whether it ever got ranked in the top 10 workplaces for mothers. And they also have a ranking for fathers, the 10 best workplaces for fathers. So the whole idea here is you do a deep dive and you look at people not who are just currently working there.
That's great. I mean, as you are doing this, I was thinking you are thinking like a journalist. You are looking at all the angles here. That's great. So like I said, unfortunately, Joann, we are coming toward the end of our show, and I like to ask every guest a story of grace. And I know that you would like to share something with us. So.
Well, the story of grace I would like to share with you comes from an employee at the Wall Street Journal who I actually talk about in the journal, and who I was convinced thought I was a terrible boss because at one point I yelled at him. And when I interviewed him for the book, he told me about the fact that he thought he deserved the chewing out, but that more importantly, he always remembered how I treated him when he joined our group. This was a guy who had never been a journalist before. He'd been a news assistant. And when he joined our group, which was a group that covered management and workplace issues, on the day I was introduced to him by our bureau chief, I was her deputy, I handed him a printed out list of my best sources on the management and workplace beat and told him, I know you don't know anything about this topic, this will at least help you hit the ground running. And I'm going to set up a series of lunches so that you can meet some of my best sources. And he told me it's always grateful to me for having essentially relieved his pressure and exhibited grace under his pressure in terms of making that transition in our group very seamless and essentially continuing to mentor him from there on.
Well, that is a great story. You opened doors for someone. And I liked what you said. You took the fear factor away from him because you were opening doors for him and someone who was new to the business, and you mentored him in and shepherded him in. That's a great story. Joann, how can people find you or find the book?
Sure. Well, my website gives lots of information about me, my Wall Street Journal career, where I worked for nearly 47 years, as well as both books. And the website is just joannlublin.com. If you decide to buy a hardback version of the book and would email me a mailing address, I'd be happy to send you an autographed book plate.
Great. Thank you. We will put your website in the notes. Joann, you have been a wonderful guest. As I said at the outset, I have been reading your work for years. I am a fan, and thank you for writing Power Moms: How Executive Mothers Navigate Work and Life. Thank you, Joann.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.